So here's the question tonight. What happened to Felicia Johnson? Where is her body? Where is the Houston man police say murdered her? Questions haunting a heartbroken family who are desperate for answers.
In April of 2022, a 24-year-old woman arrived in Houston, Texas with a suitcase, a phone full of plans, and cautious optimism about what the future might hold. She was there to celebrate her birthday, explore job opportunities, and figure out her next move. But within hours of accepting what appeared to be a routine $500 offer, she vanished. This set off a search that would unravel into one of the most disturbing cases Houston investigators had seen in years. This is the story of a young woman from San Diego whose life was cut short after agreeing to meet a man for money. A meeting authorities say placed her directly in the path of someone who may have already been preparing to kill.
Where is Felicia Johnson, the 24-year-old from California, missing since April 16th? Now, Houston police saying she was murdered.
And while the public would initially focus on one explanation, investigators were quietly uncovering a much darker truth. To understand how it all unfolded, it's important to begin with who Felicia was before she disappeared. This is Felicia Johnson's story. She was born to Kevin Johnson and Felicia Lee Smith, and she was the eldest of 3 children. But her early life was marked by instability. Her parents separated, her father remarried a woman named Myra, leaving her mother to shoulder much of the responsibility of raising 3 teenagers alone. Those close to Felicia often said she was the mirror image of her father's mother, both in appearance and temperament. She was soft-spoken, kind, and naturally radiant, with a beauty that drew attention without effort. From an early age, Felicia understood the power of that attention and what it could offer her. As she grew older, she started to become more deliberate about her image. She took great care of her appearance, curating how she looked in photos and in public. Long hair, dramatic lashes, confident movement, these weren't accidents. Modeling wasn't just a dream, it was her escape plan, a way out. But the path wasn't easy. The opportunities she hoped for didn't arrive when she expected them to, and progress came slower than she imagined. Still, Felicia refused to let go of the life she believed was waiting for her. By the time she turned 24, Felicia was living in San Diego, California, but she felt restless. Those closest to her would describe her as driven and independent, someone who was actively trying to improve her life and take control of her future. So the milestone of her 24th birthday didn't feel complete. She wanted more than a celebration, and definitely more momentum. So she made a decision. She planned a trip to Houston. It was partly an extension of her birthday and partly her seeking opportunity. She packed carefully, outfits chosen with intention, beauty items prepared in excess, leaving open the possibility that if work came through, she wouldn't come back right away. Felicia had plans and expectations for Houston. What she didn't know was that this trip would become her last chapter of her life. In early April 2022, she traveled to Houston, Texas, partly to celebrate her birthday and partly to explore new work opportunities. Houston, with its size and economic promise, represented a chance at something more. During her stay, Felicia attempted to secure work at a Houston strip club, but was ultimately turned down. Like many young women navigating financial pressure, she also used escort platforms to earn money. Felicia was someone trying to survive, trying to move forward, and trying to build something better for herself. Little did anyone know those days in Houston would be the last time she was seen alive. On the night of April 15th into the early morning hours of April 16th, 2022, Felicia was staying at a hotel in Southwest Houston. According to investigators, she posted an advertisement on an escort website late that night. Shortly after, she was contacted by a man named Chukubica with an interesting offer. He offered Felicia $500 to meet her. At around 2:56 a.m. on April 16th, Felicia was last seen leaving the hotel. Surveillance and rideshare records later confirmed that she got into an Uber ordered by Chukubica. The Uber dropped her off at an apartment complex where authorities say Chukwubuka then picked her up and drove her to his apartment on South Richmond Avenue.
Detectives say Nwobodo picked Johnson up at an apartment on Windchase and took her to his apartment on South Richmond, where he killed her. Later, HPD says he dumped her cell phone at Bear Creek Park, but they still have not found her body.
That was the last confirmed sighting of Felicia. After that, communications stopped completely. Calls went unanswered, messages were never read. Hours passed, then an entire day. And soon enough, concern turned into panic. When Felicia failed to check in, her family began tracking her phone.
The warrant says they found DNA strongly matching Felicia's at Nwobodo's home, and a gun and a knife and a shovel in his car. Investigators say they also found searches related to how to be a serial killer and most forwarded places in Houston.
What they found would immediately change the direction of the case. Her cell phone was located along the side of a road near Bear Creek Pioneers Park, 4 miles from where she was last seen. But the phone wasn't simply dropped or misplaced. It was covered in blood. Right at that moment, it became clear Felicia hadn't walked away voluntarily. Her family reported her missing, and an urgent search began.
Whenever they release her, then I will be able to have a service for her and pay her the respects that she needs.
Houston police launched a missing persons investigation while volunteers and Texas EquaSearch combed through Bear Creek Park and surrounding areas. Search teams scanned fields, wooded terrain, and drainage areas. Flyers circulated across Houston. Social media filled with Felicia's face as strangers shared her story, desperate for answers. As days turned into weeks, public speculation grew louder. Many believed Felicia had been kidnapped into a sex trafficking operation. The theory spread quickly online, fueled by fear, uncertainty, and the lack of immediate answers. But while the public would initially focus on one explanation, investigators were quietly uncovering a much darker truth. Because as detectives built a timeline of Felicia's final hours, one name kept resurfacing. And that was just the beginning of a chilling series of events. Investigators traced Felicia's last known booking to Chukwubuka, the man who had contacted her through the escort advertisement and ordered the Uber that brought her to him. This wasn't speculation. It was supported by digital records, rideshare data, and phone activity. As detectives dug deeper, the case began to shift from a missing persons investigation into something far more sinister. Meanwhile, across Houston, another piece of the puzzle was falling into place. Surveillance footage from Walmart and Home Depot showed Chukwubuka making a series of purchases in the days following Felicia's disappearance. He was seen buying heavy-duty trash bags, towels, a flashlight, gloves, and most notably, a mechanical saw. Individually, the items might not have seemed alarming, but taken together and in the context of a missing woman whose phone had been found bloodied on the side of a road, they painted a disturbing picture. Then there was the timeline. Cell tower data showed Felicia's phone briefly connecting near Bear Creek Park shortly after she disappeared, before it was ultimately found discarded there. Investigators believed this wasn't random. It suggested someone intentionally transported and disposed of her belongings. But despite the growing evidence, there was still one devastating problem. Felicia herself was nowhere to be found. As detectives continued piecing together the timeline, attention turned fully toward Chukwubuka's apartment. When search warrants were executed, forensic teams uncovered DNA evidence that investigators later described as providing very strong support that Felicia had been inside the apartment. The conclusion they reached was horrifying. Authorities allege that Felicia was killed inside that apartment. Evidence further suggested that after her death, her body was dismembered in an attempt to conceal the crime. This was not a moment of panic. It was calculated, methodical, and deeply disturbing. However, the most shocking revelation was yet to come. Weeks after Felicia vanished, Chukwubuka was stopped during a routine traffic stop. He was briefly detained, and although he was released due to insufficient evidence at the time, his phone was seized. When investigators analyzed the device, what they found stunned even seasoned detectives. The phone allegedly contained images of dismembered human remains, not just one, but multiple individuals. Some of the people depicted could not be identified. There was no metadata attached to the photos, making it impossible to determine when or where they were taken. Even more alarming were Chukwuebuekwu's searches. According to investigators, his search history included queries about destroying DNA with bleach and vinegar, deleting browser history completely, finding the most forested parts of Houston, how to kill without getting caught, and even how to become a serial killer. At that point, the case took on an entirely new dimension. This was no longer just about finding Felicia. It was about stopping someone investigators believed posed an extreme and ongoing danger to the public. On June 9, 2022, nearly 2 months after Felicia was last seen, Chukwuebuekwu was formally charged with murder and tampering with evidence. Warrants were issued for his arrest. But just when it seemed like accountability was finally within reach, the case took another devastating turn. By the time charges were filed, Chukwuebuekwu had already disappeared. Despite being questioned earlier and released before charges were filed, he had now vanished entirely. Investigators began tracking his movements, reviewing travel records, financial activity, and known connections. Soon enough, another possibility emerged. Chukwuebuekwu had ties outside the United States. Authorities acknowledged that he could have fled the country, potentially to Nigeria, which does have an extradition treaty with the US, but extradition is rarely quick or simple, and that meant one painful reality set in. Felicia's family still had no remains to bury, no answers, and no place to grieve. Worst of all, justice felt impossibly far away. As days turned into weeks and weeks into months, the reality set in. Felicia's family was left in agonizing limbo. Without her remains, they couldn't lay her to rest. Without a suspect in custody, there was no sense of accountability. The case remained open, but painfully unresolved. Still, investigators refused to stop. They continued following tips. They kept Felicia's case active in the media. They urged anyone with information about Chukwuebuekwu's whereabouts to come forward, warning the public that he should be considered extremely dangerous. And although it didn't feel like it at the time, those efforts mattered.
First thing I'ma do when I pop out is tell my nigga, yo, make sure you got the Glock out.
Because nearly a year after Felicia vanished, when hope had begun to fade and grief had settled into something heavier, something unexpected happened. In a quiet stretch of forest north of Houston, a routine workday would turn into a discovery that changed everything. And with it, the case entered its final and most painful chapter. On February 7, 2023, nearly 10 months after Felicia vanished, a routine workday led to a discovery no one had expected, but many had feared. A Texas Department of Transportation worker was conducting duties near the Sam Houston National Forest when they came across what appeared to be human remains. The location was remote, surrounded by dense woods near Semingo Lakes and H-149. Authorities were notified immediately. Montgomery County homicide detectives and crime scene investigators responded and secured the area. What they found was carefully collected and sent for forensic analysis. At the time, investigators would not confirm an identity, but for Felicia's family, the possibility was already sinking in, because deep down, they knew what this could mean. But just when it seemed like the case had gone cold, a breakthrough arrived. Dental records and DNA testing would later confirm what no parent should ever have to hear. The remains belonged to Felicia. The announcement came nearly a year after she was last seen alive. For Felicia's father, the confirmation was devastating, but it also brought something he had been denied for months: certainty. Not the kind anyone wants, but the kind that ends the agony of not knowing. He spoke publicly about the moment he was notified, expressing gratitude that his daughter had finally been found and could be brought home.
The body that was hers. We're just waiting for the dental records to, actually have the 1,000%. It's a score for us. It's a score for the family. Whenever they release her, then I will be able to have a service for her and pay her the respects that she needs, because I want the perpetrators to be caught.
He thanked the TxDOT worker who made the discovery, believing that without that one moment, Felicia may never have been recovered. Meanwhile, across Houston and San Diego, the news spread quickly.
We want the suspect to know that the no-snitch policy will never protect you in our community, that we're coming for you, we're looking for you, and we'll leave no stone unturned in trying to find out your whereabouts.
Vigils were held with lit candles and tear-stained faces. Memorials were heavy with kind words about Felicia as her loved ones tried to preserve her memory. Photos of Felicia, smiling, young, full of life, filled timelines once again. But with confirmation came the harsh reality that there would be no courtroom closure for now, because the man charged with Felicia's murder is still missing. Despite the discovery of her remains and the weight of evidence against him, Chuck Wibuka remained a fugitive. Active warrants for murder and tampering with evidence were still in place. As of the most recent updates, he had not been taken into custody. There would be no trial date, no sentencing hearing, no moment where a judge read out consequences for what investigators believe he did. And not absence of accountability, of answers, has become another burden Felicia's family had to carry. Still, the legal case against him is clear. According to investigators, Felicia was taken to his apartment after responding to an online ad. Evidence supported the conclusion that she was killed there. DNA linked her directly to the scene. Surveillance footage showed him purchasing items consistent with cleanup and concealment. Her phone was recovered, discarded, and damaged. Digital evidence pointed to disturbing behavior and intent. In the eyes of law enforcement, the case was strong, but justice requires presence, and Chuck Wibuka's absence meant the case remained open, suspended in a painful in-between. As investigators continued searching for him, they also made one thing clear to the public. He should be considered extremely dangerous. Anyone with information about his whereabouts was urged to contact Crime Stoppers, because the concern wasn't only about what had already happened, but about what could happen next if he wasn't found. For Felicia's family, grief took on a new shape once her remains were returned. They were finally able to plan a proper service where they got to honor her and visit in the future. They were finally able to bring her home to California. Friends and loved ones remembered Felicia as more than a headline or a case file. She was a daughter, a young woman with goals, someone who traveled across the country looking for opportunity and a better future. Her involvement in escort services, something that had fueled judgment and speculation online, did not define her life, and it did not make her death any less tragic or deserving of justice. That distinction mattered deeply to her family, because Felicia's story became part of a much larger conversation, one about how society treats victims, especially women, when their lives don't fit a narrow definition of acceptable. The community response reflected that shift. People began speaking out about victim blaming. Social media and tons of voices began to shine light on the dangers of dismissing missing adults. This case was a prime example of how quickly assumptions can derail empathy. For Felicia's family, grief took on a new shape once her remains were returned. Felicia's case forced many to confront uncomfortable questions. Why did it take physical evidence for her disappearance to be taken seriously by some? Why was her work used by strangers to justify silence? And why does accountability feel so elusive when violence intersects with vulnerability? Even now, those questions remain. As of today, there has been no trial. Chukwuebuka Nwobodo has received no sentence. He walks free because the final chapter has not yet been written by the courts. But Felicia's story doesn't end there. It lives on in the efforts to find her alleged killer. She lives in the calls to share her case and in the reminders that every missing person matters, regardless of circumstance. If you have information about Chukwuebuka's whereabouts, you are urged to contact Crime Stoppers of Houston. Tips can be submitted anonymously. One call could make the difference between a case left unresolved and one that finally sees justice. And beyond that, there is something else this case asks of all of us. It prompts us to look past assumptions and extend compassion before judgment. This case urges us to recognize warning signs and speak up, especially when someone's voice has been silenced. Felicia came to Houston chasing opportunity. She deserved safety. She deserved to return home. And until justice is served, her story deserves to be told. We all have a duty to keep Felicia's name visible and her case alive. And as always, take care of each other without judgment and assumptions. Let us know what you think in the comments section below.